Hello, book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. Today is October 1st, so I will be doing my September wrap up today. Alright, so we are already into month 10, which is kind of crazy. But September was a pretty decent reading month for me. It was Becca's Bookopoly, and I did partake in that, as well as doing my own TBR. So I will start with some stats. If you saw my October TBR, you will see that I've completed my personal TBR, which is wonderful. No punishment prompts in November, but I did not quite finish Becca's Bookopoly. I did finish the majority of them, but there was one book that was left over, and that book was The Maid by Nita Prose. This was for the prompt to use a random emoji generator, and I got one of those little bellhop bells or whatever they're called from hotels. Unfortunately, I was not able to get to this, and I am not planning on getting to it in October, so I am just putting it back on the shelf. But other than that, it was a pretty successful month. I read 11 books this month, which is a pretty normal number for me. In fact, this is the 5th month this year where I read 11 books, and I read 2,819 pages and listened to 40.58 hours of audiobook. So page number wise, that is in my top 3. Same with audiobook wise, though it is a little less audiobook hours than I have had in the last couple of months. But you know, it is what it is. I was in a little bit of an audiobook slump during this month, but I did get through a few of them, and I will of course discuss those. As far as my average rating for the month, it was a 4.12, a little lower than last month, but definitely in the top 4 of the year. So pretty happy with the way that the month went. Had some books that I really enjoyed. I didn't have anything under a 3-star, so that's really wonderful. So I will go ahead and just jump right into book number 1. Alright guys, so the first book that I read and finished this month was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. This is a historical fiction book, even though I used it for contemporary prompts, so my bad. But we are following 2 white passing twin sisters who, after they run away at the age of 16, start to live very different lives. For the beginning of the book, we follow Desiree, which is one of the twins, who has spent a lot of her life wanting to leave their small town, which is populated only by light-skinned Black people and is very hyper focused on the color of their skin. So this book does touch on the topic of colorism. She ends up running away with her sister to New Orleans, but after about a year or so, Stella, the other twin, ends up disappearing one night to go live as a white woman. So Desiree decides to, I think she moves to DC and ends up marrying a Black man and having a very dark-skinned child, which eventually she returns home with because she's no longer able to stay in the marriage. We also end up following a few years later, maybe like 10 year jump, Desiree's daughter, Jude, who has spent a lot of her life growing up in a community that was very focused on light skin, while she herself is incredibly dark, even darker than her mother, and apparently even darker than her father, which made her feel incredibly isolated, and had trouble having friends. So going off to college, she decides to go to California, where she does cross paths with Stella's daughter, who is of course not aware that she is Black. We follow Stella's point of view as well as her daughter, whose name I'm forgetting right now. But overall, we are just jumping from character to get character, and there are some time jumps, a little bit of backward, a little bit of forward, which to a degree was interesting, but also in a way I sometimes wish that the timeline was a little bit more linear, but it didn't take away from the story too much. I really enjoyed each of their individual stories, but Jude and her partner Reese, who is a trans man, intrigued me the most. I really enjoyed watching their relationship. It felt really real. I also enjoyed seeing the trans rep in this. I have never read a book with a trans rep that was not set in contemporary times, so that was the first time for me and thought it was really interesting. I thought that the writing for this book worked really well for the story. It allowed for a really natural flow. Even though I wouldn't say anything overly exciting happened in the story, the author was really able to pull me into these characters' everyday lives. And I felt really connected to all of them and was really rooting for them. They were incredibly real. They were flawed. They were also really relatable as we watched them struggle through different parts of their life. I was a little bummed by the ending. I didn't feel like it quite gave me the closure that I was looking for, but at the same time, after spending so much time with these sisters, I did feel that it was in line with their character and their personalities and their other actions. So I do understand why the author did that, but that was probably one of the reasons I couldn't quite give it a full 5 stars. All right, the next book I finished was a final book in a series, so that was exciting, and that is The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater. This is book 4 in the Raven cycle. So this book follows Blue and the 4 Raven boys as they explore the ley lines and the surrounding area in hopes of finding a dead Welsh king, which supposedly will be able to grant them a wish. So this book I felt was like the darkest out of all the stories, since we do introduce a sort of like demon-like figure. This book definitely had higher stakes than some of the other books. I really enjoyed that we got to see the relationships that have been building throughout all these stories coming together. I enjoyed the slow burn of all of those relationships. I enjoyed that their friendship stayed incredibly strong throughout all of this, and that Blue's family continued to be involved. I do like it when the family is involved in the drama and dangers of their teenage children, not that they're just letting their teenage children run rampant. So that was nice. Now, I ended up giving this only 4 stars. I know this book has a controversial ending, and while I didn't hate it, it kind of let me down a little bit, left me a little underwhelmed. You know, when you're dealing with so much magic and such high stakes throughout all these series, and everything is building up to this point, and then it's just kind of like, and we're done. It was just a little bit sudden, and it almost felt kind of like the author was done with the series. You know, like she reached those last 50 pages and was like, and I'm done. And you're like, wait, no, you still gotta, you know, it was almost like she didn't want to put the time into writing a more dramatic ending. I don't know how to explain it. I mean, as I talked about most of these books in vlogs, so if you want to hear my further thoughts about any of these books, you can probably find it in one of my Bookopoly vlogs that I did during September. But I did point out that, you know, I wouldn't not read this series. You know, if you're hearing people saying the ending isn't worth it, the ending isn't worth it, you know, don't pick up the series. I would still pick up the series because I think that the journey was wonderful. I had a great time reading this series. I had a great time with the characters. The plot was always intriguing. The ending just didn't live up to what I expected from the story. So I would still read it. You know, just lower your expectations for the ending. Book number 3 for the month was Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and I ended up giving this a 3.5 stars. I listened to the audiobook, and that was a little bit of a difficult experience for me. I sometimes had trouble tracking who was doing what and what exactly was happening. At the end of the story, I did feel like I had an understanding of what went on in the book, but sometimes while things were happening, I was like, I don't know what's going on. People are dying, I think, maybe. So it was a fun story though. I really enjoyed the dialogue, and there was a lot of humor, a lot of sass, a lot of bantering, a lot of offending other people. So I had a lot of fun with that. For synopsis, we are following Gideon, who is part of the Ninth House. And she has been trying to escape Ninth House for years because she feels very much like a prisoner there. And at the beginning of the book, we are watching her as she is trying to escape once again, but the regent's daughter, I think might be what she is, Haro, convinces her to come to one final meeting. And at this meeting, she makes an offer to Gideon to be her cavalier, as she goes to the first house in hopes of becoming a lector. So a lector seems to be a very powerful figure that serves the emperor of the houses, and is like a position that allows you practically almost immortality. So we follow a bunch of necromancers, all from the 9 different houses, and their cavaliers as they go through a number of tasks in hopes of proving that they are worthy of this title. The book turns more into a murder mystery, kind of like a whodunit kind of situation, closed space, limited amount of people who could have done it situation as we move along. I did enjoy that aspect of it. I did enjoy the necromancy and the tests that they were given that kind of further explained all of the things that you could do with necromancy, because I don't know much about necromancy. So kind of watching these people kind of expand their abilities with necromancy was really entertaining. I really enjoyed Haro and Gideon's relationship throughout this, and loved watching it grow from them purely hating each other to tolerating each other to wanting to protect each other. That was a lot of fun. There was a few of the side characters that I enjoyed, even though some of them I kept mixing them up and didn't know who was who. And I thought that the ending was really intriguing, really climactic, and definitely got me excited for book 2. Book number 4 is a book that was a bit out of my comfort zone. It's kind of a horror, classic horror kind of thriller, and that is The Dumb House by John Burnside. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. You will not hear me saying that I enjoyed this book. This book made me really uncomfortable. I hated our character. I hated everything that was happening in this book, but that's what made it such a good book, because that's what this author was trying to do. So in this book, we follow a character who in his childhood, his mother had told him a story about Akbar, and The Dumb House. And this is a story about a king who had a bunch of children raised by mutes in an isolated setting to see if a language was inherently learned or if it was something that needed to be taught. And our character felt that he never got an answer to that question, and so he decides to do that experiment on his own children. So the first two parts of this book do not follow the experiment with the children. That doesn't happen until part 3. We mostly follow our character in childhood, and as he starts to research and take the steps necessary to be able to perform this experiment. In a way, we also just kind of watch him spiral into a more terrible person who just does worse and worse things and becomes an even worse and more manipulative person as he uses people, abuses people, hurts them. This book does have a lot of trigger warnings. I do discuss them in my vlog, but considering it's such a short book, going through all the trigger warnings can be a little spoilery, but if you're interested in this book, I would definitely go in and check those out because there's probably just about almost every trigger in here, just a heads up. But I really enjoyed the writing, the way the author wrote this character. I kind of felt like how I figured I would feel if I read You, that book that was turned into a TV show. I don't know who wrote it. I've never read that book, but a lot of times you'll hear people saying, well, you start to see things from the villain's point of view, and you still know he's a bad guy, but you kind of like start to not like the people around him or start to say things like they deserved what happened to them. In a way, you start to feel that through, because you read everything from this bad guy's point of view. So that is something that I definitely noticed while reading this book. I enjoyed the way that this seemed to be one of those books that like kind of expands your mind a little bit. Like you feel like you're learning something from it, even though it's not a nonfiction. Just the way that it was written and the way that our character is in a way like an academic, the way that he views the world and the way that he wants to study the world, things like that, just made me feel like I was getting a little brain itch there now that I'm out of school. I really enjoyed the third part with the children. Enjoyed is the wrong word. Like I said, I hated every part of this book. But just watching the twins' relationship with each other and the way they reacted towards him was incredibly interesting. And the ending was not what I was hoping for. So you will spend your whole book waiting for the ending and like just like, okay, we did have to get to the ending and then everything will be fine, but everything will not be fine. Everything will not be fine. And I gotta respect the author for doing that. So a thoroughly upsetting story. Definitely would, not go into this if you're not like pristine mental health status. I highly suggest this book if you're feeling up to it. Book number 5 is actually the book that I rated the lowest, but I did not put it as my least favorite book just because it was like a good time kind of book, I didn't get too much out of it, but I had a lot of fun while reading it, and it just kind of was like a bit of a brain cleanser, especially after reading The Dumb House. And that is Heaven's Official Blessing by Mo Shang Tong Shui. And we follow our character, Shilon, I believe is his name, Shilon, yep. And he he was a prince of a very prosperous nation who at the age of like 16 or 17 ascended to godhood. Some years after he ascended to godhood, his nation fell under attack and he decided, against the advice of the other gods to join the war and ended up making everything worse, therefore becoming a god of misfortune and being banished from the heavens. It's 800 years later, and he is ascended to heaven for the third time. And all the gods are completely annoyed with him, so the emperor sends him off to hunt down some evil spirits in the mortal realm, to kind of get him away from the other gods and to help him gain some merits, which are what gods collect in the form of prayers. But since he's a god of misfortune, he doesn't really get any. So the emperor's trying to help him out here. But while he is down there, he runs into Sanlong. Why do I switch his name? It's Sanlong. And they partner up to take on some ghosts kind of situation. So this is supposed to be a queer story. There's not much romance in this book, and I don't know how much there's going to be. I did see the cover for volume number 4, and they're making out on the cover, so definitely excited for that. But for now, we just get to learn a little bit about the way that the heavens work, the way that the spirit world works. And I just think that the book had a good amount of humor in it, that it was entertaining. The one thing that I had trouble with was, and this might be because it's written in another culture or from someone in a different culture, there was definitely a lot of distaste towards people who cross-dress, and also the comments that were made towards a certain perceived as unattractive woman were went a little too far for my taste. I definitely don't think that when a woman is dying and you find it unattractive that you need to think that, wow, this girl looks so funny while she's dying because she's so ugly. Like, I don't think so. So that's also one of the reasons I had to just rate it lower, because I didn't agree with the way that, a woman's appearance was discussed, or, the intolerance towards people who were cross-dressing, things like that. Wasn't a huge fan of that. That was just at the beginning of the story and didn't occur throughout the remainder, but it is something that really stood out to me. But I will of course be continuing the series just because it's a lot of fun. So the next book I finished was an audiobook by Brian Young, and that is Healer of the Water Monster, or Healing of the Water Monster. And this was a YA story about a young Navajo boy who is spending the summer with his grandmother in hopes of completing a science project to see if modern corn, or the corn that the indigenous people use, grows better. So this book tackles a lot of topics. So while he is there, he gets lost out in the desert and stumbles across a small water monster. The water monster is not feeling really well, and has not been feeling very well for many years. And so the water monster says, I will help you get out of the desert if you will help me heal. And he's like, yeah, deal. I need to get out of here. So we follow him as he tries to kind of diagnose the water monster, and then find a cure for the water monster. He does interact with other holy spirits throughout the story, which was really interesting to be able to see those. A few other large themes that were in there that I thought were really great to see in a middle grade include our main character, unfortunately I can't remember his name right now, comes from a house of divorced parents. So you can definitely see how that has caused a bit of trauma for him, especially the way that he reacts around adults that are angry. kind of that silent anger where they don't want to display their anger in front of the child, but they are still very angry, and the child can sense that, and it, has a negative effect on that. So I'm glad that they discuss the importance of, communication when things in the home are not going really well. He also has a uncle who, towards the beginning of this book, comes to live with his grandmother as well, and he is suffering from PTSD and depression. He, I believe, was a soldier, and when he returned, just never really fully recovered. He has issues with being alcoholic, has trouble keeping a job, and also seems to have some suicidal thoughts as well. So those are, of course, darker themes that are addressed in this book. One thing I really liked is that they really emphasized the importance of therapy, while they also talked about the importance of traditional ceremonies to help Indigenous people when they're not feeling well physically or mentally. They also talked about the importance of going to therapy or using more Western medicine. And I like that the doctor they went to, even though he was white, acknowledged that Indigenous people need a combined regimen of traditional and Western medicine, and that's usually what helps them the most. So definitely glad that that was addressed, as well as seeing our character working really hard not to just save Water Monster, but to save his uncle as well, just showing how important support of friends and family is in times of illness, whether it's physical illness or mental illness. The ending definitely had me tearing up. It was a very bittersweet ending, but overall, I think this is definitely a story that everybody should read. The next book that I ended up reading was a reread, and that is 1984 by George Orwell, and I ended up giving this 4 stars. I say this is a reread, but I read this back in maybe my freshman or sophomore year of high school, so I pretty much remembered nothing, so it was practically like reading it for the first time ever, to be honest. But I had a really great time with this book. For the most part, there were a few parts where it started to get a little heavy, like where I was almost reading a textbook, and it caused me to like really struggle to get through those sections and fully grasp everything that was being said. But overall, I had a really fun time. We are following Wallace, I believe was his name. It's not on the back, but I believe his name was Wallace. And he lives in a dystopian society that I believe is set in London, and he works for the Ministry of Truth, which is the department that kind of controls the media, and kind of alters history in such a way that portrays the party that is currently in power in the best light possible. Our character is very much against the party, and he does kind of small forms of rebellion, whether it's buying trinkets or writing in a diary. He does not approve of the party or Big Brother. He thinks that their lives are really terrible, and that, why would anyone want to live in a society that's constantly lying to you? He thinks everyone is just brainwashed and they're idiots. And one day he gets the opportunity to start an affair with a young woman, and they decide to have this affair as well as see if they can possibly take part in a rebellion against the party. But this book focuses heavily on the manipulation that the government has over its people, the control it has over its people, how important the media is. It also discusses things like the importance of knowing history, and how advantageous it is to have control over what is being told about history. This book kind of takes place in a society where things have gone too far. It kind of seems like we've reached the point of no return. People are too brainwashed. They have been raised and trained to react to certain situations in a certain way, and individualism is pretty much gone. It's they're all one people, and they're all to respond to things the way that the party wants them to. So no one really knows what's true, what's false. So they're just going along with what's being said at the moment, even if it's different than what's being said the day before. So it really shows the importance of individual thought, making your own decisions, being your own person, having the right to have your own opinion and to question things, which in this society you cannot do. So, I mean, if you want a book that has a lot of commentary on government control, I feel like it's still relevant nowadays for sure, especially when you think about like the government's use of war, the government's propaganda, their control of the education system, things like that. The story still definitely holds relevance. So if you haven't read this book yet and you're at all interested, this is the book. All right, so the next book is Bones Beneath My Skin by T.J. Klune. This is a kind of contemporary sci-fi story. This is apparently his first self-published book that he made. We follow Nick, and he has recently lost pretty much everything. His parents are dead, his brother doesn't want anything to do with him, and he has lost his job. After his parents died, they have left him a cabin in the woods, and so he decides to retreat there to kind of lick his wounds and kind of make a plan B to see how he can kind of put his life back together. When he arrives there, he finds something very unexpected, and that is a young girl called Artemis Darth Vader and her bodyguard, Alex. So it seems there are people hunting Artemis, and so he decides to join them on their journey semi-reluctantly to try and get her back home. This book deals a lot with grief. It also deals a lot with found family and learning to trust people, even if you've been kind of burned in the past. The two men, Alex and Nick, I really hope that's his name. It's not. It's Nate. Alex and Nate, at the beginning of the story, are two people that at some point in their life had nothing. They had lost all the people that mattered to them, and they were just in really dark places. So watching them kind of in their own way over time crawl out of those dark spaces with the help specifically of Artemis was really heartwarming. I thought the story was really moving. I just absolutely love the relationship between the three of them, and I liked the discussions of not fearing the unknown, and not lashing out at things that are different and unexplained and instantly seeing them as a threat. Stop, taking a moment and really assessing the situation, and could this be a good thing? Am I, sometimes it's good to plan for the worst case scenario, but there are situations where if planning for the worst case scenario is hurting someone, then maybe you may need to reconsider your actions. I thought the ending of the story was absolutely perfect, and there is definitely a part of me that is hoping that TJ Klune returns to this world, and I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. I don't know if I mentioned that. 3 more books. The next book I am going to talk about is the only book that I gave 5 stars this month, and that is Winter's Orbits by Everina Maxwell. This is a sci-fi story that follows Kaim and Janen, who are being forced to get married after Janen's previous partner, Tom, was killed in a flybug accident. And this is a highly political story. I would also say it's a little bit of a murder mystery, since it turns out that Tom's death might not have been an accident, but it was actually a murder. I thought that the story did a great job at gradually escalating that that as the more they learned, the higher the stakes became, the bigger the problem seemed, and more intimidating the adversaries appeared. I really enjoyed the world building, and I'm definitely glad that there's another book out in this world, because I definitely want to continue to explore it. I really enjoyed the relationship between our 2 characters. Unfortunately, you can start to realize pretty early on through Janen's interactions with Kaim and his responses to certain situations that Janen has spent the last few years in an abusive relationship. And so that is where the mental health rep in this book really comes from. I personally have not been in a abusive relationship and do not know of anyone who has been in one, but I would say that it seemed to be well handled. I really enjoyed that he gradually came to trust Kaim and came into himself a bit more, and realized that he was no longer a background character, but he was his own person who was able to contribute in really important and valid ways. I thought the characters worked really well together, and that they balanced themselves really well. Both of them were incredibly insecure in the beginning, but after some communication, I think they started to see how well they worked together, and how important their roles in this investigation were to kind of like saving billions of lives. But Kaim is kind of a social butterfly. He is the troubled child of the emperor. Well, the emperor's his grandmother, but he's kind of the troubled grandchild of the emperor. He did a lot of partying when he was younger in his college days, and a lot of sleeping around, things like that. And he's now trying to be on the straight and narrow, but a lot of people still kind of treat him like that party boy. So he's kind of trying to shed that old reputation, but he's incredibly great at, creating friendships, networking, and things like that. And that's really an important, and that ends up being really beneficial to their investigation. And Janen helps him realize how important this skill set is, instead of him just being like, oh, I just get along with people. He's like, no, you're opening doors to allow us to move forward in this investigation and help ourselves and help other people. And Jaden, on the other hand, is very much an academic. He's incredibly intelligent. He's really good at problem solving, seeing patterns, and kind of picking out abnormalities and things like that. And so together, Kaim was able to kind of open the doors to get Jaden this data. And once he had it, he was able to do all these wonderful things with it. So great partnership. We love to see it. I like it when the characters that are together are not too similar, but they really complement each other really well. So highly recommend this book. Lots of fun. Great mental health rep, great relationship, great world building, great mystery. All right, and the second to last book is a book that I have been working on for quite a long time. I started this book in June and I started it physically in June and read the first 100 pages and ended up putting it down and was just having trouble bringing myself to pick it up again. So I decided to give the audiobook a shot and was able to complete it this month. And that is We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Fazal. Basil? I apologize. I might have said that wrong. I'm sorry. I didn't look it up. But We Hunt the Flame is about Saphira, who is also known as the Huntress, and she and her village live outside of the Oz, is that what it's called? Which is a magical forest that is growing ever nearer to the village, and those who enter never return, or if they do, they seem to be slightly mad. So she is the only one that can go in there and hunt and come back unscathed. So she hunts for her village to help keep them fed, but they do not know that she is a woman. She pretends to be a man since she does live in a patriarchal society. The other character we follow is Nasir, and he is the only son of the Sultan and is also an assassin. So he is sent by the Sultan to follow Saphira after she is sent to Shah, which I think is a desert, to find this book that is supposed to help bring back magic. And then Nasir was sent there to follow her. Once she retrieved it, he was to take it and kill her. So on this journey, I felt like not too much happened in the first half of the book, which is why I was a little bit disappointed. I felt like this book was really hyped, but I just wasn't really vibing with the story. But then in like the third quarter, I really started to enjoy the characters, especially Altier, who is a general who comes along with Nasir. I really enjoyed their banter. I really liked that he was a source of comic relief, but at the same time, he had a lot of, I felt like, emotional development throughout the story. I thought his backstory was really interested, and I'm definitely excited to learn more about him throughout the series. Well, I guess just in the next book because it's just a duology. But I felt that he was the most intriguing character. I did think that in the last quarter of the book, things really started to pick up and come together, and the ending just really had me excited to get into book 2, which is why I gave it 4 stars, even though I would say it is a pretty low 4 stars, and I did actually put this as my least favorite of the book just because for so much of the book I did struggle with it, but I did really start to like the characters towards the end. And there are even some characters that we didn't get to see too much of in this book that I have a feeling we'll see more of in the next book, and I'm really excited for that. So yeah, this book was a little bit of a struggle for me to get through, but I am glad that I persevered with it. I think that book 2 is definitely going to be more interesting for me because there's going to be even more magic, even though while they're in Shaw, there are some magical creatures and things that appear. But I'm hoping there's more magic and more drama and more character interactions in the next book that will just keep me a little bit more entertained than the first, half of this book did. And finally, the last book. I feel like I've been filming forever. I'm probably gonna have to cut out a whole bunch of what I've been saying. But the last book I was able to just squeeze in. I finished it yesterday on the 30th, and that is Edelon by Grace Draven. This is a book 2 to Radiance. In the first book, we follow Ildiko, whatever her name is, and Brishan. She is from the kingdom of Gar, which is a human kingdom, and he is from the Kai kingdom. I can't remember what it's called. But there is a third human kingdom that resides near their kingdoms that wanted to invade Gar for access to their ports. So the Kai and the Gari decided to form a trade treaty, which was solidified by the marriage of these two. She is the cousin, the niece of the king of her kingdom, and he is the second prince of his, but his brother had produced so many heirs that he was pretty much a worthless a worthless prince. He was of no value. And so the two of them, because they are of different species, this is technically like a light monster romance. He has relatively human features. But they find each other really unattractive, but personality wise, they get along really well. So this is a friends to lovers, and they are one of my favorite relationships, and they continue to be so in book 2, even though they have already transitioned fully from friends to full lovers by this book. I was still really invested in their relationship and the obstacles that they faced in this story. I also really enjoyed the plot of this book, which I can't really go into without spoiling book 1, but the stakes were incredibly high, and I really enjoyed the expanding of the world that we got to experience. I liked the way that the characters reacted to the situation that they were in. They definitely were harsh when it needed to be, but they were also really empathetic and giving, and just doing everything that they could to protect those around them at all times. I think that Grace Draven does a good job of writing characters who are in complicated political situations, and that she writes her characters handling it really well, and navigating those obstacles really well. Like I said, relationship was really great. There is a side character in here who we'll be seeing a romance of in book 3, which I'm really excited for. We got to see a little bit more of those two characters interacting, and it definitely gave you that little taste that would get you eager to get into book 3. This book did make me cry within like the first 15 minutes. I was a little emotional already when reading this book since my cat unfortunately passed away this month. But honestly, I think I would have cried either way. It was just really moving. Grace Draven, just her writing really resonates really well with me. So I definitely will be reading more of her stories. And if you have not picked up the series yet and you're interested in fantasy romance, or want to dip your toes into monster romance, highly, highly recommend this one. All right, guys. We did it. My back is killing me. This chair is so uncomfortable. But those are the 11 books that I read this month. Let me know down below what your best and worst book of the month were. As always, thank you guys so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!